Hi, everyone, and welcome to our LA County Library virtual event, Pride and Prejudice and Scorpions. I'm Martin Malelu, and I'm a librarian for LA County Library and the head of the LA County Library Pride Committee. I use they, them pronouns. I'll be your host. We also have Vicky here today from the library with us as well, and Vicky uses she, her pronouns and will be our moderator. Today's program, we will be talking with entomologist Lauren Esposito, who uses she, they pronouns. Lauren will discuss scorpion research with us today and tell us more about the network of queer scientists called 500 Queer Scientists. Before we begin, I have a few announcements and housekeeping notes. First, I want to take the opportunity to let you know that our summer discovery program is happening now through August 14th. Sign up online at lacountylibrary.org/summer-discovery or by visiting your local library location to log books you've read and complete fun challenges throughout the summer months. June is also Pride Month. This is a special month where we recognize the histories, stories, and achievements of members of the LGBTQ+ community. Although any month is a great time to celebrate the rich diversity of people that makes our world unique and wonderful. For more information, including book lists and community resources, please visit LA County Library's Pride page at lacountylibrary.org/pride. Today's program is sponsored by Edison International and LA County Library Foundation, and we'd like to give a big thanks to them. And now I'm going to pass it over to Lauren, who's going to introduce themselves a little bit for us. And yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk to this group. Libraries are one of my favorite places, and I think they're one of my favorite places because they're kind of like natural history museums in many ways. They're a collection of objects. And so I'm actually talking to you today from the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my journey into science and what life in a natural history museum looks like and what that means. And the organization that I started called 500 Queer Scientists. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here again. And do you want to start by telling us a little bit about what you do now and maybe how you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a natural history curator. So I'm the curator of arachnology. And that what that means is that I study spiders and scorpions and sort of things of that nature. Um, I have a PhD in biology, which means that I got an undergraduate degree, a bachelor's degree. I went to the University of Texas in El Paso, which is actually where I grew up, in El Paso, Texas, right on the border of Texas and Mexico and New Mexico, actually. And then after getting a bachelor's, I went to New York City, where I got a master's and a PhD at another natural history museum, the American Museum of Natural History, which is in Central Park in New York City. And then after that, I did something called a postdoc, which, like, if you've ever watched a show about doctors, like, you probably have heard the word resident. It's sort of like a scientist in training still. So while I had a PhD, which made me a doctor of philosophy, I still was receiving mentorship. I guess, like, mentorship is kind of lifelong. Like, you always have some mentors, but a more formalized mentorship. So I was studying in another scientist lab at the University of California, Berkeley. So that was my first time living in California. And from there, I got my position at the California Academy of Sciences. So my job is to do research.
So you do a lot of other stuff besides just what you told us your job is. You have this nonprofit that you started, Islands and Seas. Can you talk a little bit more about how you got involved with that and maybe how that relates to everything else you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So I actually so I told this, like, very straightforward story about how I, like, went down this, like, really traditional path of becoming a professional scientist. But that doesn't mean that, like, it felt really straightforward to me, and there was definitely some, like, curves along the way. When I finished my postdoc, I actually decided that I didn't want to do science research anymore, and that I, like, didn't like participating in research, that it didn't, like, feel like I was doing enough for the world. Um, I'm a biologist. I study biodiversity, which means, like, the way that plants and animal species are distributed on Earth and what species are out there. and and I do a lot of field work. Like I spend tons of time out in nature, just documenting the world. And as I was doing that, as I was going through these years of like being a scientist in training and doing all that work, I felt like I was seeing things disappear. I was going back to places that I'd been before, and instead of a forest, it was a parking lot. Um, and I felt like as like just a scientist sort of working in this isolated ivory tower on questions about research, I wasn't actually contributing to like halting the loss of biodiversity that I felt concerned about. So I quit science, and I decided that I would wanted to start a nonprofit organization, and I decided to do it with my best friend who had also quit science. And we came up with a plan, and basically what we wanted to do was like, but we were both really cared about biology research and biology education, science education. And what we wanted to do was come up with a way that we could be involved in and facilitate science and science learning, without necessarily being the ones doing the research ourselves. So we decided to create a network of what's called field stations, and field stations are basically like places in that are typically remote, like out in the countryside or in the forest, where scientists go and have a space to do research that's like safe and stable, and they know that they have somewhere that they can sleep and a kitchen that they can cook in, and maybe access to like a really basic lab to do their research. But that we didn't want to just make these field stations anywhere. What we wanted was to find places where the biology was really unique, like it was a really unique place on Earth, but also that the communities were really unique. And I think more importantly, communities that didn't have access to science and scientific learning. And so we have been building for 6 years our first field station. It's 100% off grid. It's like been a real learning experience, like how to run a business, how to fundraise for money to do things, even like crazy things like how to do electrical work from a solar grid, because neither of us like had ever done electrical work before. But when you're building an off-grid field station and there's nobody to ask and there's not even internet to like look up how to do these things, like a lot of it's kind of learning by trial and error. And so we actually finished during the pandemic, during the COVID pandemic. And now we have like a fully functional off-grid facility that can host up to groups of up to 20 scientists and science students. But also we've been doing programs with the local community. Where we're located is a place in Baja California Sur, which is the Baja Peninsula, just south of actually the largest continuous protected area in all of Latin America. It's a biosphere reserve called the Vizcaíno Biosphere Reserve. It's super unique. Like it's desert, but there's desert plants and animals that are found nowhere else on Earth. And there's also like pretty impoverished small communities that mostly rely on fishing for their economy. And the town we're closest to is called San Juanico, and I love it. It's a beautiful, like very magical place, and we're excited about the things that we're doing with the community there.
Are you planning on like setting up other stations, and where do you see those stations going up?
That is the goal, is to set up other stations. So like while this has been I think a really slow like lead up time getting this built, we've learned a lot of lessons along the way and are kind of ready to tackle other places in more rapidly in the future, I hope. And the next one we're kind of looking towards is establishing something in the lower Caribbean, sort of lower Eastern Caribbean, ideally in a on the island of Tobago, which is like a little tiny island. A lot of it's still really in really good condition, like environmentally, and so it's a great place to like try to bring some science learning and science research.
That is super cool. Um, so you've gotten to travel all over the world through your research. Where's your favorite place that you've been?
Oh my gosh, that I feel like that's a question I get a lot, and I never know what to say because I feel like love almost everywhere I ever go for different reasons. Like each place, and I will say like I mostly specialize on islands.
Mhm.
And every time you go to an island, it's different. It's like the geography is different, which means that the environment's different, which means that there's different plants and animals that are found nowhere else in the world, which means like you're seeing something new for the first time every single time you go to another island. It's also like the communities are always really different, the cultures are always really different. But I spent like a large part of my childhood growing up in the Bahamas. And so for me, the Caribbean is always like holds a really like special place in my heart. But I'd be hard pressed to pick a favorite. Um, like just trying to think of one, I'm like, no, but what about that one? But the Caribbean region is like amazing, really incredible. You can't lose.
That's fair. The world is very, very big. There are a lot of
It
really
is.
good places in it. So for the most part, your research focuses on scorpions.
It
Um, so you've stated publicly, everyone always asks you what your favorite fact about scorpions is, and you've said that it is that they give live birth to their young. So what's your second favorite fact about scorpions?
My second favorite fact about scorpions, um, well, I guess my second favorite fact is like the way that scorpions perceive the world, and it's like when we think about perception, we think about like our five. How many senses do we have? Five senses: sight, hearing, feel, taste. I'm missing one.
Smell.
Smell. Yeah. And scorpions have basically all those same senses, but it's not the same way that we're sensing them. So they have a few different structures. The first is that on the bottom of their sort of belly, they have these structures that look like little combs, and those are sensory structures that they use for sensing vibration, sensing odor. So they're like kind of smell with them. There's even some specialized nerves in there that can kind of taste. So they're sort of like smell and taste combo. So they have like a nose, tongue, like skin on their stomach. They also have all these specialized hairs all over their body that can detect micro vibrations, and that could either be like wind, so like feeling wind currents, or feeling even just like something walking. So some scorpions, like scorpions that live in sand dunes, are able to orient themselves in the direction of oncoming prey because they can feel the vibration of the prey and know which direction it's walking towards them from. And so they'll like change their orientation to face the prey item that they're hoping to capture. They also have olfactory, like little hairs. So basically, like hairs that can smell, that are covering their hands, and they use those to like detect other scorpions to see whether they're like maybe scorpions they might want to mate with that are of the same species. And then finally, they have eyes, and their eyes are they have three sets of eyes. Two of the sets are like really, really basic eyes that just sort of sense light or dark. Like, is it light or is it dark? They can't see color or like shapes or anything. They just like literally tell their brain if there's a light or not a light. And then they have two main eyes, like right in the center. And those main eyes can definitely see more like kind of shapes, like they're more like our eyes. Definitely not like as good of resolution, but they can like judge size and distance and stuff like that. Um, but the crazy thing is that, and as a triad, like as a set of three, they're arranged like a triangle. And there's some scorpions that we're pretty sure are using that triangular um, arrangement of eyes to navigate by starlight. So they actually like are looking up at the stars at night and seeing the star patterns and knowing like which direction they're walking because they can tell which direction relative to the pattern of stars.
That is very cool.
So celestial navigation is another. I guess
That's
that's the moral
awesome.
of the story here is that my favorite second fact is that they can navigate celestially.
That is wild, and I would never have known that. So thank you for sharing that. Um, let's see what has your work overlapped with other fields that you wouldn't think you'd overlap with? Like, what are some surprising things that you've had to do in your line of work?
Oh my gosh, I don't even like. I feel like there's so many that I don't even know where to go with this. I mean, like just in terms of other science, my work overlaps a ton with all sorts of other kinds of science. Um, there's someone that's working in my lab that collaborates with physicists to try to understand super rapid movement in spiders. So she studies spiders that her name is Dr. Sarah Cruz, and she studies spiders that um, are just sort of like sit and wait predators. So they don't build like a spider web; they just sit on something and wait for something to walk by. They blend in really well. But they have those same kind of ears in their feet where they can hear vibrations. And they also orient themselves to oncoming prey, but they do it so rapidly that it's the same speed as a DVD spins in a DVD player. It's about 5,400 rotations per second. You can't even see the movement, like you just see them in one direction and then see them in another direction. So she's been working with physicists to try to understand like how that's actually possible for them to generate that much centripetal force to execute a move that quick. Um, we work with geologists, so we one of the things that we're really interested in understanding is scorpions and other arachnids, so like spiders that live on islands, are all oftentimes really unique from island to island. And a lot of the explanation for why they're unique and the timing of their relationship with one another, if it's like islands that are all really close to each other, has to do with geology. Like when did those islands arise, or did they used to be one island and then they broke up into lots of different islands through earthquakes or something, or maybe they were different islands and they got smushed together.
Mhm.
So there's all kinds of factors that come into play, and so like collaborating with geologists is really important. um, I I'm also an evolutionary biologist, so I study evolution. So I collaborate a lot with other evolutionary biologists. And then, like, I mean, as like field station wise, like the other hat that I wear, I'm working all the time with like very random things and people, trying to understand how to build an off-grid facility. But I think that also extends to field work. So I like mentioned earlier that I travel a lot, and spend a lot of the time in the field, like out in some remote forest, and you encounter all kinds of people, and a lot of those people, because they live there and like observe the world around them every single day, know way more about the scorpions where they live than you can possibly know.
Right.
So I've collaborated with like hunters and like random little kids who know how to get tarantulas out of holes really well, and just like you name it, I've probably encountered that person, and had like a fantastic day with them, or night, I should say.
That's fun. Let's switch gears a little bit. I'm really interested in 500 queer scientists. Was there a specific interaction or observation that inspired you to start this network?
Yeah, there kind of was. I So the California Academy of Sciences is the oldest scientific institution in the Western United States. We've been around a long time. We were founded in 1853. We're the oldest natural history museum west of the Mississippi. And one day I was thinking sort of about the history of the Academy and reading about prior curators of the Academy, and realized that I was the first openly queer curator in the history of this institution. And we're in San Francisco. Like San Francisco is a very, very gay friendly place. So it's not
Mhm.
because it's like the California Academy of Sciences is in like Oklahoma or somewhere where they're like actively legislating against trans and queer people. It's a very gay friendly and very protected place. So it was surprising to me to be the first um, person in a senior scientific position that was openly queer. And and that like reflection made me realize that actually like I'd never had an openly queer trans professor. I had never worked in a lab with another queer or trans person. As a student, I'd never met another queer or trans arachnologist, and that actually science feels like incredibly isolating as a queer person. And that kind of like I guess it kind of like led me down this spiral of self-reflection that like I actually don't, up until that point, I didn't really talk about my like queer identity at work. It wasn't something that I was keeping actively hidden, but it also wasn't something that I was like feeling free and safe to share in professional workspaces. Even though like there are many queer people and trans people working at the California Academy of Sciences, they're not working in research. They're working in other departments. There are queer and trans scientists
Mm.
as well. But there's just a culture of, I think, in science that people shouldn't express themselves, and the way that that looks, or like the way that it manifests itself, is people say things like, "Oh, I don't care about your identity. I care about your science." Which on like face value, you're like, "Oh, great, you care about my science, like you value my science." But what they're really saying is like you shouldn't talk about that at work. we don't want to hear about that. Like it makes us uncomfortable, and we just would rather like keep it like strictly professional, which is fine if I think if you're cisgender or heterosexual, if you belong to the community of people that created the field of science and scientific research, at least in the Western sense. And so, but if you're not, if you don't belong to part of that mainstream, if you're not a white cisgender heterosexual male, um, you probably feel othered at work on occasion, in along many different axes, whether that's like your gender, your ethnicity, your queer identity. There's many ways to feel othered within science, and it's just not something that we're allowed to talk about. And so I was like, I'm gonna do something about it. And the one thing that I feel like I could do as an individual, or actually in with the help of a few friends, is create a visibility campaign to try to just raise awareness about the fact that it is okay to bring your full identity to work, and that actually it's something we should be celebrating.
Have you seen any, like, are there any observable, you're a scientist, are there any observable outcomes from this project, this
Oh,
network?
that's such, I feel like that's such a like a tricky question, because you said, well, you're a scientist, which means like I should have like real scientific data about it to answer
No,
this question conclusively. I don't have any real scientific data, mostly because we don't collect it in science. Like we don't collect data about people's LGBTQAI plus identities. We collect data about ethnicity, about race, about gender. We don't collect data about whether people are queer or trans. So we don't have a really good idea of how we're doing in science. There's some estimates that have recently been published that estimate something like 125, I think it was 137,000 LGBTQ people are currently missing from the STEM workforce because they quit somewhere along the way. Like maybe they quit as a student, or maybe they quit as a professional, but they left. And that's really just an estimate based on like what we know about how prevalent LGBTQ identities are in the like general US population, and what we know about how often people leave, or at least how often people like express intentions of leaving. And so I don't know, what's happened really, but I do know that 500 Queer Science has started out with 50 stories of LGBTQ identifying scientists that I had collected online, like through email. And now it's over 1,800 stories, and it's stories of people from all scientific disciplines all over the world, although mostly English speaking countries, since it's by and large been up until this point an English speaking visibility campaign. Um, but but it's been quite amazing to see, just to read people's stories and be trusted with their stories, quite honestly. Like I feel like it's a lot of trust people are putting in me to share their stories with me, and trust that I'm doing the right thing with them and the right thing by them. So it's been inspiring for me as an individual. As
Mhm.
for the community, I don't know. I mean, we have about 30,000 followers on social media. So we're sort of stewarding a community of 30,000 folks and helping them connect with one another. And again, we have about 1,800 stories that have been contributed in the last 4 years, and we get more every week.
That's awesome that it's growing so fast. Based on your own personal experiences, do you think that it is getting easier to be a queer person in science, like since you began your education?
I do actually. And like for me, some of the best evidence for this is that, like, by and large, the majority of people that have contributed their stories to 500 Career Scientists since it started have been people earlier in their career. So people that are like current students or current sort of early career professionals, like maybe they already finished their PhD, or they've gotten their first job, but they're kind of in that transition period. Um, and I think what that says to me is a few things. First, it says that people feel a lot more safe professionally to come out and be out. And I think, the most likely thing that happened during the period that I created 500, like between the time I created 500 Career Scientists and today, is that the Supreme Court um, made a ruling that gave protection for workplace protection for LGBTQAI plus identities. And at the time I started 500 Career Scientists, that wasn't in place. People could still be fired for showing up to work and being queer or gay or trans. Not to say that people don't try to do that today, that there aren't like attempts to undermine our queer and trans identities at work, but there is at least a federal workplace protection in place. Um, so they can't legally do it. There's always ways around that, making you feel super uncomfortable. But the community of people that are contributing their stories are saying, I think, are saying to me that they feel comfortable enough, but more importantly, that they're not willing to hide their identities, and that's inspiring. And I think that that's really exciting and hopeful for the future of the culture of science.
What are the benefits of being out at work for a scientist, do you think? But maybe,
Well,
or for anyone.
yeah, for
really.
anyone really, right? But I think for science in particular, because when you think about like science or STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the thing that you have to remember is that innovation runs on ideas. The way that we innovate is through ideas, and the way that we generate ideas is through diversity, or at least the way that we generate diverse ideas. So everybody brings a unique perspective when they come to work, no matter who that person is. And the more different like walks of life that are coming to a workplace, the greater diversity of ideas that they're bringing with them, and the greater potential that they have for innovation. And in fact, there is scientific data that demonstrates this. There's a whole thing called the diversity innovation paradox, which tells us that diverse scientific teams are more likely to innovate, and they're more likely to innovate at a rate that's higher than non-diverse teams. So if you have a lot of diversity in your team is more likely to come up with something like really groundbreaking and transformative within your field than a group that's not diverse. But unfortunately, what the diversity innovation paradox also tells us is that for people who are from historically underrepresented or marginalized groups, they're less likely to be credited with that innovation. So it's oftentimes like the white folks on the team, or the paper that got published right after that really diverse team that came from like a predominantly white team that gets credited with the innovation or the idea. And so there's a lot of work left to be done, and especially in terms of really uplifting the voices of people from historically marginalized groups like queer and trans folks, and ensuring that they're credited for the ways that they're improving the science and the technology that we have.
I know you don't have to share this video. Do you want to share your video?
Oh yeah, I would love to.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think this is a good segue into that.
It is a good segue, and I like always would prefer other people talk in their own words instead of just my words. Okay, let me share my screen really quick. Okay, let's see how this goes. We need more complex and more diverse concepts of what science is and who does science if we're ever going to solve the problems that we're facing in the 21st century.
I think there's a lot of aspects of science to destroy.
Oops, sorry.
As we know it, need to blow it up because it needs to be remade in a way that works for people.
New Science is an exhibit both here on the public floor at the California Academy of Sciences, but also in digital form through the Google Arts and Culture platform, which is an exhibit focusing on the stories of 23 incredible individuals who all have identities that intersect with scientists, but also with being persons of color in many cases, being immigrants, being women, or being people who are transgender or gender nonconforming, but working in STEM and being really successful in doing so. Oftentimes, things about our identities leave us feeling othered, and that otherness makes people feel like they're allowed to question the way that you do science, the interpretations that you make, or just the quality of your science itself. And oftentimes those things go really understated or unrecognized in the moment, and it's only later on as they accumulate in your mind that you begin to doubt your ability as a scientist. And I think for me, this is really why it's important to have visibility. It's important to have strong role models that are out there whose identity you identify with, that tells you that you're not alone, that there is a place for you, and that your opinion and your identity as a scientist is valued, not in spite of those attributes that you bring, but because of them.
We've now founded Black and Marine Science, and we have truly built an organization that's aimed to celebrate Black marine scientists, spread environmental awareness, and inspire the next generation of scientific thought leaders. And that's what we really want to do, change the face of who people see as scientists.
What we see in AI is that major AI labs kind of support a lot of types of domination, either financial domination or kind of military or security-based domination. I'm an Arab American trans woman, so that already means by feature of being Arab, my body and my person is already under increased scrutiny after 9/11, and the fact that I'm trans furthers and deepens that kind of suspicion. Holding these identities makes me very critical of these systems and offers me kind of a lens and a way, a viewpoint, and thinking about how we can push back and challenge them.
I don't view myself as a conventional scientist, but that shouldn't be the case, because what does a scientist look like? I want to create a space so that people who are like me, people who are queer, who have many marginalized identities, who don't normally see themselves as scientists, to look at yourself and be like, yeah, you are one. And you are more powerful than other conventional scientists, because you have these awesome ideas and you have this awesome community.
The ocean is literally on fire. So what are we doing to change that? And I think it really is going to take leaders that look like all types of people, but also leaders that are in differences in ages, differences in abilities, differences in thoughts, because it's going to take everyone. My vision for new science is a science that doesn't have barriers, and the barriers that have been placed are actively worked to be broken down, and that there is truly and sincerely access for all.
That's new science.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's an exhibit. It's on display at the California Academy of Sciences. If you find yourself in the San Francisco Bay Area, you should come and visit. But you can also see it online through the Google Arts and Culture platform. And I think we can get you the link to that if you want to experience the virtual version of the exhibit and hear a lot more from 23 incredible people in their own words and voices about their contributions to science and why they're making science better.
yeah, we'll definitely be sending out an email, a follow-up email after this with a bunch of links to everything we've talked about. I think that especially today, you open the news and you just read all this stuff and everything is just not great. So watching that video and knowing that there are people out there who are just doing an amazing job for all of us is just really inspiring. It makes the world feel less awful, I think.
I think so too.
Let's what advice do you have for queer youth today if you were going to speak to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that the first piece of advice I have is that there are no barriers anymore. There may be hindrances, there may be ways that you feel like you're being disempowered as a result of your identity, but the reality is that there's no longer barriers in place because there are strong allies and there are strong leaders who have walked in the footsteps before you, and so you should walk in those same footsteps feeling empowered that you can do whatever you want and be whatever you want, and that science and every other discipline in the world needs you and needs your voice to move forward and to progress.
I think that is important. It is, there are so many queer people out there doing everything, every job, right?
Absolutely.
Can we go back to scorpions? I have a
Yes.
couple other questions about scorpions.
We can always go back to scorpions.
Cool. What are some common misconceptions about scorpions that you can easily debunk?
Common misconceptions. Well, I think one thing that people always their first reaction when they see a scorpion is that it's gonna attack them. I feel like the number one thing that everyone should know about scorpions is that they can't jump.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Scorpions can't jump. So if it's gonna chase you, it will run maybe, but it's a small animal. It's not gonna run that fast. And also they would really by and large pretend to be prefer to be left alone and pretend to be dead. They just don't move. Number two fact about scorpions is like the large majority of scorpions cannot kill you or even like do you major harm. All scorpions do have venom, like that's true, but they use their venom for capturing and killing prey. And like unless there's something that's happened recently that I'm not aware of in the world, scorpions don't eat humans, and so they don't have venom. They don't make venom that hurts humans. It might feel a little bit painful, like a bee sting or a wasp sting, but that's about the worst of it. It's not designed to incapacitate you.
Have you ever had an experience with a scorpion where you have felt afraid?
I have, I've done field work like all over the world, right? And one of the groups of scorpions that I'm like a specialist in is a group of scorpions called bark scorpions, like not like a dog, but like a tree bark, because they like to live kind of under bark and stuff. And they actually do have pretty nasty venom. There's about a dozen species that can kill adult humans. And so I think like the scariest moments that I've had have been collecting those, because I was like aware and like being extra cautious. But there was not anything that dramatic that happened where I was like, oh my God, like I almost died because the scorpion almost stung me. Like the more dramatic things that
Right.
happen related to scorpion research are like, oh my God, I almost got run off the road by this semi truck, or
Wow.
like someone just shot at me because they see me in like a field in the middle of the night and don't know what I'm doing there.
So it's mostly people and less scorpions.
People.
Yeah.
People are the scary ones for sure.
Let's see what else we've got. What are some gains that have been made for the general public because of the research you're involved with?
Well, I mean, a couple things. Like first, like we're in the midst of a scorpion research renaissance. Like 100 years ago, we had a order of magnitude less knowledge about scorpion species on Earth than we do today. So, like about 100 years ago, we scientists had documented like somewhere around 250 scorpions. Today, we've discovered over 2,500, and there's like dozens of new species discovered every year. And so we're like really accelerating the rate of research that we're doing. And I think that that's really important because scorpions are great sort of ecosystem sentinels. They're good detectors of climate change and other like human caused change because they're kind of long lived. Like scorpions can live up to 25 years. They're the top predators in the invertebrate world. So they're kind of like, if you picture wolves being top predators in the vertebrate world, scorpions are like the ones in the invertebrate world. They're the wolves. But so that means that if like insects, which they typically eat, are responding to changes in maybe plants or fire, scorpions are responding to the availability of prey. And so they're really great sentinel to tell us the relative health of any given ecosystem. There's also been a lot of research in particular into the ways that we can benefit directly from the products that scorpions produce. So I mentioned all scorpions make venom, and that we've discovered about 2,500 scorpions in the world. But what I didn't say is that each scorpion has an arsenal of venom that contains up to 250 compounds. And so if we take that 2,500 scorpions times 250 compounds that they're producing, that's like a whole lot of potential biomaterials. And the main thing that we're researching scorpion venom as potential uses for is drugs, not like the kinds of drugs that are illegal, but the kinds of drugs that help humans. Some of the things that they're studying are potential painkillers. So scorpions interrupt the way nerves signal with each other. So if you are experiencing chronic pain and we can harness the power of scorpion venom to interrupt nerves communicating to send a pain signal to your brain, then there's the potential for new classes of pain drugs that are non-addictive, and also like stay consistently functional over time. Whereas the ones that we use now, you tend to develop sort of a resistance to it over time. So you have to take more and more. There's other things that are antimicrobial, so like prevent the growth of bacteria in scorpion venoms. And so we're looking at those for like treating potential bacterial infections that are resistant to traditional antibiotics. There's other like experimental treatments that are being researched for cancer treatment, for treatment for MS, for treatment for Alzheimer's, for arthritis. Pretty much anything that involves nerves and nerve signaling has a potential medicine in scorpion venom.
That's great. That's amazing. let's see what else. What advice do you have for anyone still in school looking to get into a similar field of study? What courses do you think they should focus on?
So my advice, if you think you're interested in something, is to like try it out, like give it a go. Take classes in that field. So like if you're interested in, for example, entomology or arachnology, which is scorpions and insects, you should take like basic biology classes, but you could also take classes in natural history. You could take classes in like invertebrate zoology or entomology, which is the study of insects. There's also oftentimes like outside of a traditional school setting, courses like master naturalist courses that have information about things like insects and arachnids. Um, but I think, for me, the biggest thing is if you think you're interested in something, try it out. And if it turns out that you hate that, like trust yourself, and you can change your mind as many times as you want. There's no limit to it. So I think it's like always good to just try things on and see how they are and how they work. One thing that's really big, I think, and a really huge tool if you're interested in nature at all is like some of the citizen science apps and platforms.
Mm,
So like the biggest one these days, especially here in California, is iNaturalist.
mm.
iNaturalist is an amazing community. You can like immediately participate in an online community of people that are interested in the same things that you're interested in. And the great thing is that you can take and upload your observations of nature, so just with your smartphone. And once those observations get uploaded, the community helps you figure out identify what the thing is in the photo through discussion, basically. Like different people offer up suggestions of what they think is in the picture. And eventually the community comes to a consensus. A consensus is reached when there's 3 or more people agreeing on the same identification. And once that agreement is made, then the observation becomes research grade, and it actually becomes a scientific observation that scientists then use to do scientific research. So while you like might just be having like an awesome time and getting to like discover the nature around you, you're also contributing directly to science and our understanding of how our environments here in California are changing.
Yeah. Can you, for those who don't know, can you say what citizen science is
Oh
a
yeah,
little bit
citizen
more?
science, sure. Citizen science, or oftentimes nowadays people like to use the term community science because citizen science, like I think, sort of indicates that you need to be a citizen in order to do it, which you do not. So it's how communities come together and contribute scientific information. And so you don't have to have any scientific credentials. In fact, I personally don't think that you need scientific credentials to do science at all. Doing science is simply making observations and asking questions about the observations that you're observing, the things that you're seeing. But citizen science or community science is coming together as a community around a scientific question. And in the case of something like iNaturalist, the question is what is around us, like what plants and animals are occupying this time and space. And you can contribute your data by taking a picture.
Cool. We will include a link to that in the email, and I think Vicky just put that in the chat as well.
Yeah.
So people can explore iNaturalist a little bit. What are you most proud of that you've done?
Like ever in my whole life.
Sure, in your whole life.
I think that I would say 500 Queer Scientists is definitely like way up there, like building a community of scientists that all identify as queer and trans and ace and intersex and two-spirit and all sorts of identities. Um, but I actually think like my greatest accomplishment is the students that I mentor because they're amazing and they like go on to do really great things. Like I just get them for a short time, like maybe that's a month or maybe that's a couple of years in my lab, but then like I get to have colleagues for life, which is kind of awesome. So I think that that's my greatest contribution.
So you do a mentorship program through your job?
I do. So like I said, I'm a scientist, but I didn't talk anything about all the education stuff I do. I run a program for undergraduate students at the California Academy called the Summer Systematics Institute. It's a one-on-one mentorship program. I also mentor students through the program. So while I direct the program, I mentor students as well. I also have students. I have a faculty appointment through San Francisco State University. So I mentor graduate students, usually master's students, through their master's. So I'm their primary research advisor. And then I've like had a variety of other formal and informal student mentorship things throughout my career that have brought all kinds of people through my lab doors.
What are you doing in the future? What are your future plans, aspirations, goals?
Well, my most immediate future plan is to celebrate Pride.
Nice.
Happy
Yes.
Pride.
Yes. Happy Pride.
But you know, moving forward, like the biggest project that I'm working on right now is a new initiative through the Cal Academy that I dreamt up and co-direct with another scientist named Dr. Raina Bell. It's called Islands 2030, and it's really focused on halting the loss of biodiversity on 5 tropical archipelagos by the year 2030. Um, it has sort of 3 main objectives. One is bringing communities together, particularly members of the community that haven't traditionally had a voice in biodiversity and environmental issues at high levels, to have discussions about the future of diversity and what that looks like on their island, and come up with plans together. The second is doing biological research on the islands to document, like in really fine scale, what the plants and animals currently living on the island are and what their population health is. So how healthy are the populations? And providing that data to the public, like making it generally accessible, which is oftentimes something that scientific data is not. So giving that same community that I mentioned, bringing together access to scientific data to use for their own as a tool for their decision making. And the last is mentorship and training of a new generation of scientists that are born and raised on these tropical islands and can go on to be the leader in biodiversity science for their island and for their community. And that involves people at all different levels of sort of education, and from ranging from high school students all the way through graduate students and postdocs.
That's cool. I think keeping it local is always a good idea, right?
Absolutely.
If anyone, I'm going to give you all a few more minutes to ask questions in the Q&A if you have them. But I think I want to know, what is the biggest scorpion you've ever seen?
The biggest scorpion I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest species of scorpion is the emperor scorpion, which is in Africa. It's also one of the only scorpions that's globally recognized as being endangered.
Oh.
Because it's collected in like really high numbers for the pet trade, and like they live 25 years, so they like their populations don't come back super fast when they
Right.
get hit by collecting for the pet trade. And they're big, like they're big. They're like look like a little lobster. They're large species of scorpion.
Have you seen one in real life?
I have. I mean, I've never collected one like in the wild, but I've seen a lot of them in the pet trade.
And lastly, if people want to find out more about you and your research, where can they find you?
They can find me through the California Academy of Sciences website. I'm there in like a lot of different ways, but I also am pretty active on social media. So you can find me on Twitter. Arachnology Nerd is my Twitter handle, and on Instagram, my lab actually runs our Instagram account. It's called CAS Arachnerds, and we post things about like what's happening with our research and what's happening with our lives that we're excited about and proud of. And those are probably the 2 best ways. I do have a TikTok, but I don't know how to use it.
Is there anything else you want to plug before I exit us out of here?
No, I think like this was a great conversation. Thank you for all of those like really thought-provoking questions. They're not like the typical ones I get.
I'm glad that you could join us. I think that queer people doing science is very important. Queer people doing anything is really important, but representation definitely matters. So I am glad that you could be here today.
Thank you so much.
All right, you all. I'm going to give you a little outro. Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed today's virtual program, Pride and Prejudice and Scorpions. Look for information about upcoming virtual events on our website, lacountylibrary.org. And if you haven't yet, we invite you to sign up for our summer discovery program happening now through August 14th, and visit our Pride page for resources and additional information. Stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day.